In a small town in Wisconsin, Ed Gein, a man who seemed harmless, lived in seclusion for many years. No one could have imagined that inside his dilapidated house lay a hell made of flesh and bone. Masks crafted from human skin, chairs upholstered in it, clothing stitched from the body parts of women, and skulls turned into bowls. He wasn't a serial killer in the conventional sense, but he became a symbol of a silent evil, one born from obsession, isolation, and a twisted mind shaped by a haunting fixation on his deceased mother. Today we step into the dark and deranged world of Ed Gein, the Butcher of Plainfield, to uncover the true story that terrified a nation and inspired generations of horror films. Plainfield, Wisconsin, a tiny rural town with a population of just over 600 in the 1950s. It was once seen as a peaceful community where neighbors knew one another, endless fields stretched into the horizon, and people still felt safe leaving their doors unlocked at night. And it was in this seemingly safest of places that Ed Gein lived. At first glance, Ed was a thin, reclusive man who kept to himself. He didn't drink, didn't smoke, never got into trouble, and many even described him as gentle. He occasionally helped neighbors fix things, tended to his small farm, and even babysat for local families. To most, Ed was just an odd farmer, harmless. But no one knew. Behind that quiet face, something dark was simmering, like embers burning quietly beneath the ashes. It all began on the morning of November 16th, 1957. A woman named Bernice Warden, the owner of the town's only hardware store, suddenly vanished. Her store was left abandoned, the cash register open, and no one had seen her since early morning. The only clue left behind was a receipt for a sale made to a familiar customer, Ed Gein. Police decided to visit Ed's farmhouse that same afternoon. The door to the back shed was slightly ajar. A foul stench wafted out, the unmistakable smell of death, rotting in the cold of winter. One officer stepped inside and immediately collapsed in horror. Bernice Warden's body had been strung up upside down, like a hunted animal. Her torso had been gutted, her head decapitated, her arms spread wide like some grotesque display. But that wasn't the worst of it. When police entered the main house, it was like stepping into a nightmare. They found a real human face fashioned into a mask and mounted on the wall, a chair upholstered in human skin, a belt studded with women's nipples, a skull hollowed out and used as a bowl, a box filled with human noses, ears, and lips, and then a suit, including a dress, bra, and face mask, all hand-stitched from real human skin. The police could hardly believe what they were seeing. Some officers left the scene and never returned to law enforcement again. Ed Gein's home wasn't a house. It was a living nightmare. And the harmless oddball turned out to be a deeply disturbed, deranged man, possibly one of the most grotesque criminals in American history. As flashlight beams swept through each room of Ed Gein's decaying house, investigators felt as if they had stepped into a maze of horror. This wasn't just a murder scene, it was a storage facility for human remains. The filthy kitchen reeked of rot. On the stove, a cast iron pot was still warm. Inside it was the heart of Bernice Warden. The living room was cluttered and dim, but all eyes were drawn to an armchair upholstered in human skin, stitched together with crude, thick thread. In another corner, a ceiling lamp had been fashioned from a human skull and scalp. Even the door handles had been replaced, with human knuckle bones. In total, police discovered 9 masks made from female scalps, a shirt adorned with human breasts, and piles of bones stacked in a cabinet. They found halved skulls used as containers for odds and ends, a box filled with severed vaginas and nipples. In the closet, they found a costume, including a dress, stockings, mask, and gloves, all made from the skin of women. This wasn't just madness, it was a twisted ritual. Ed had been collecting female body parts primarily by robbing graves. He targeted corpses that resembled his mother's physique. On moonlit nights, he would silently enter cemeteries, pry open coffins, take what he needed, and return home, as if he had simply been out gathering vegetables from the garden. But in the case of Bernice Warden, it wasn't a corpse from the past. She had been murdered, shot dead, and that was the detail that gave police enough evidence to charge Ed with homicide. During interrogation, Ed didn't deny anything. He answered calmly, even describing details as if discussing a routine chore. He confessed to digging up more than 40 graves and killing at least 2 women, Bernice Warden and Mary Hogan, another woman who had gone missing years earlier. Mary's face was found inside a paper bag in the corner of the kitchen. Of all the things Ed said, one line chilled investigators to the bone. "I just wanted to try it on. I wanted to feel like my mother. I wanted to become her." For Ed Gein, wearing human skin, especially that of women, wasn't about physical pleasure. It was part of a deeply disturbed journey to reconnect with the memory of his deceased mother. One part of the house remained untouched, perfectly preserved, clean, sacred. No one was allowed to enter. It was exactly as it had been when his mother was alive. The rest of the house, however, had become a crypt, a laboratory, and a chamber of psychological torment. No monster is born a monster. They are often made, shaped by fear, by distortion, and sometimes by the very hands of their mother. Ed Gein was born in 1906 in La Crosse County, Wisconsin, the younger of 2 sons. His father, George, was an alcoholic, weak, unemployed, and incapable of guiding or disciplining his children. But within that household, true authority rested with one iron-willed woman, Augusta Gein. Augusta was a religious fanatic, extreme to the point of obsession. To her, the outside world was a den of sin. All women, except herself, were whores. Men were weak, pitiful. Sex was sinful. Joy was temptation from the devil. From a young age, Ed was trapped in this psychological grip. His mother forbade him from playing with other children, and he only attended school for the required hours. Each day, she read the Bible to him, but not the passages about love or salvation. She chose only the verses about punishment, hell, and the depravity of women. In Ed's eyes, his mother was more than just a parent. She was God, morality, and everything he knew. When his father died of heart failure, Ed and his older brother Henry remained under Augusta's complete control. But Henry, the only one who ever dared challenge her, died suddenly in a mysterious brush fire in 1944. The circumstances were unsettling. When police arrived at the scene, Ed led them directly to Henry's body, which was lying peacefully, unburned, with no wounds or signs of smoke inhalation. Authorities ruled it an accident at the time, but years later, many would question, did Ed kill his brother just for speaking against their mother? After Henry's death, Ed was left alone with Augusta. Not long after, she suffered a stroke. Ed cared for her as if she were a saint, but she eventually passed away, leaving him completely alone. And that was the moment everything fell apart. Ed Gein never recovered from his mother's death. To him, she wasn't just a loved one, she was the embodiment of moral perfection. Her absence created a psychological void so deep that reality and delusion began to merge. He started hearing her voice. He believed she was still watching him. And in his desperate loneliness, he came up with a way to bring her back. By wearing the flesh of women to become her. It was no longer love, it was a sick obsession, and it was the beginning of Ed Gein's descent into darkness. where he would turn human skin into masks, bones into decorations, and his home into a twisted shrine of obsession. After Augusta Gein's death, the house where Ed lived became a wasteland, both literally and figuratively. He sealed off the rooms that once belonged to his mother, leaving everything exactly as it was when she was alive. Pillows still bearing the shape of her head, dust-covered fabric faded with time, and the chair where she once read the Bible still perfectly positioned by the window. No one, not even Ed himself, was allowed to enter. It was the sacred shrine, a place where her memory lived on, while the rest of the house slowly descended into a waking nightmare. And in the darkness, Ed's mind began to drift. With no one left to control him, he spiraled into a state of madness. But instead of lashing out like most would, he tried to reconstruct the image of his mother in the most grotesque way possible, by becoming her. It began with women's clothing, but soon fabric wasn't enough. He turned to the graveyard. He exhumed the freshly buried bodies of women, especially those who had a similar build to his mother. He wasn't seeking sex. He didn't rape the corpses. Instead, he skinned them. He soaked the skin in chemicals, dried it, then stitched it into bras, dresses, and masks. He crafted a full woman's suit to wear, what he called mother's outfit. At times, he would put on a wig, wear the skin mask, slip into a dress, and walk around the house, not like a sexual deviant, but like a child playing dress-up, desperately trying to feel the embrace of his mother again. But soon grave robbing wasn't enough. The dead were cold, silent, soulless. Ed began to believe that only warm, living blood could bring his mother back. And so, the murders began. The first confirmed victim was Mary Hogan, the owner of a small tavern near Plainfield. One day in December 1954, she vanished. The only trace left behind was a pool of blood and an empty cartridge case. The police found no suspect, not until they searched Ed's home years later and found Mary's face preserved inside a paper bag. Then came Bernice Worden, and that marked the end of Ed Gein's grotesque, obsessive descent. Psychologists would later diagnose Ed with extreme body dysmorphic disorder, mild schizophrenia, and neurotic obsessions centered on his mother. He couldn't distinguish fantasy from reality and acted as though he were performing a dark, self-created ritual. He didn't kill out of hatred, not for pleasure, not for robbery. He killed to be closer to his mother. For Ed, each piece of skin was a piece of memory, every body part a step closer to becoming the one woman he worshipped more than anything, his mother. The day Ed Gein was arrested, the American press exploded. But what truly shocked the nation wasn't the number of victims. It was the details, grotesque, horrifying, and unlike anything ever seen outside the pages of fiction. For the first time, Americans were forced to confront a chilling truth. Nightmares can begin with the quiet neighbor next door. Ed Gein's crimes went far beyond criminal investigation. They struck at the deepest layers of primal fear, fear of madness hiding behind normalcy, fear of the dead not resting in their graves, fear of the ultimate violation of the human body and dignity. It didn't take long for Hollywood to respond. In 1959, author Robert Bloch, who lived just a few miles from Plainfield, wrote the novel Psycho, featuring Norman Bates, a young man who kills his mother, preserves her corpse, and suffers from a dissociative disorder so severe that he becomes her when committing murder. In 1960, director Alfred Hitchcock adapted Psycho into a film. It shattered cinematic norms of the time, with its shocking shower murder scene, a main character killed midway through the movie, and the raw portrayal of a killer's disturbed mind. It launched a new wave, psychological horror, and laid the foundation for the slasher genre. Then in 1974 came the Texas Chainsaw Massacre with the iconic character Leatherface, a hulking figure wearing a mask made of human skin, mute, living with a deranged family in the rural backwoods. Director Tobe Hooper later confirmed, "I was inspired by the Ed Gein case. Not the serial killing, but the idea that a crumbling old house could hide unimaginable madness without anyone knowing. And in 1991, Hollywood took the disturbing imagery to a new level with The Silence of the Lambs. The character Buffalo Bill, a man who kills women to sew the perfect skin suit, was a clear nod to Ed Gein's behavior. Though Hannibal Lecter stole the spotlight, it was Buffalo Bill who truly embodied the darkest fears surrounding the human body: gender identity and control. No film ever named Ed Gein directly, but he was there, in every stitch, every skin mask, every damp, decrepit house hiding unspeakable secrets. Since then, the image of the deranged killer who keeps body parts, hair, skin, bones, clothing, as trophies has become a cinematic archetype. But the most terrifying part, it wasn't fiction, it was real. It started in Plainfield. Its name was Ed Gein, and the world has never felt entirely safe since. The day Ed Gein was arrested, the American media went into a frenzy. Sensational headlines flooded the front pages. Man makes lamps from human heads. Butcher wears women's skin. He called corpses his friends. But in stark contrast to the chaos outside, Ed sat quietly in the interrogation room. Silent, obedient, answering each question like a child caught hiding toys under the bed. No resistance, no outbursts, just an eerie emptiness in his eyes. In January 1958, Ed Gein was formally charged with the murder of Bernice Worden. However, he wasn't immediately put on trial. A panel of medical experts was assembled. After a series of psychiatric evaluations, Ed was declared mentally incompetent, diagnosed with delusions, identity disorder, and mild schizophrenia. Instead of being sent to prison, he was committed to the Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane in Waupun, Wisconsin. There, the butcher of Plainfield was no longer a monster. He became patient number 267, a short, polite man who displayed no signs of violence. Nurses said Ed was respectful, enjoyed reading, and had a particular fondness for comic books, especially children's humor. In fact, many who interacted with him described Ed as a friendly old man. But that changed the moment he spoke of his mother. His eyes would shift, his voice tremble, and he'd whisper, "She's still here. I know it." In 1968, after a decade of treatment, Ed was retried. He was found guilty, but still deemed mentally unfit to stand trial, and was returned to psychiatric care. For the next 2 decades, Ed Gein lived a quiet life, passive, uneventful, tending flowers, mopping hallways, occasionally reminiscing about his childhood on the farm. No one could believe that the man folding paper cranes in the ward once skinned human beings, crafted masks from scalps, and sewed clothing from corpses. He never expressed remorse, never apologized, never shed a tear. He simply lived and waited to die. On July 26, 1984, Ed Gein died of respiratory failure caused by cancer complications at the Mendota Mental Health Institute. He was 77 years old. He was buried beside his mother, Augusta Gein, in Plainfield Cemetery, just a few miles from their old farmhouse. Ironically, his grave was repeatedly vandalized. Even his headstone was stolen, and only recovered years later. In the end, the final resting place of a man who once robbed graves had to be hidden to protect it from being robbed. That circle, grave robbing worship, dying quietly, and being cursed in collective memory, had come full circle. More than half a century has passed since the day Ed Gein was arrested. The old wooden house in Plainfield, once a living hell, is now nothing but a patch of overgrown weeds. It burned to the ground in a mysterious fire in 1958, just days before it was set to be sold. No one confessed. No one was investigated. Some say it was the town's way of exacting punishment. Others believe Ed himself somehow willed the fire from afar to keep his secrets buried forever. His grave, now unmarked, sees no visitors, but his name never died. Ed Gein wasn't a serial killer by modern definition. He only confessed to killing 2 people, but the legacy he left behind far exceeded any body count. He became the first blueprint for a new kind of villain in criminal history, deeply disturbed, sexually confused, and trapped in a warped space where love, worship, and madness blur into one. He didn't kill for thrill. He didn't rape. He wasn't impulsively violent. Everything he did was ritualistic, slow, deliberate, and silent. And that's what made Ed Gein so terrifying. He wasn't a beast. He was a man, twisted to the core. Criminal profilers, authors, filmmakers, and documentarians still reference him when exploring the roots of evil. Not to sensationalize, but to understand. Sometimes monsters don't come from hell. They come from a home where love is distorted. The story of Ed Gein isn't just a case file, it's a symbol of psychological decay when a human being is isolated, misled about the world, and imprisoned in a sick form of love from childhood. We might watch Psycho and shiver at Norman Bates. We might flinch at the skin mask of Leatherface. We might recoil at the chilling silence of Buffalo Bill. But if we trace them all back to the source, behind every mask, there is one real man. A boy once, who loved his mother with all his heart, who lived among the fields of rural America, and who slipped into darkness because no one stopped him. His name was Ed Gein, and America has never forgotten.